Thank you for tuning into the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. I'm your fervent feminist host, Raven O'Neill, and I get the honors of sitting down with women experts from all walks of life to discuss the ideas, opportunities, and the strategies that women can take advantage of to get ahead in our patriarchal society. So, if one of your love languages is learning how to hack patriarchal systems and structures, I invite you to join us and help move the needle. I'm excited to welcome today's guest, Dave Trausneck. For more than 20 years, Dave has driven cutting-edge journalism, digital media, social media, and media relations strategies, delivering results for Fortune 500 companies, federal government agencies, private businesses, and global nonprofit clients across the United States. He's won multiple Emmys, as well as an Edward R. Murrow Award for Broadcast Journalism Excellence. His work has also received several awards by the Associated Press, and Dave's digital media work has received a Webby Award, as well as several other nominations. Dave and his wife, Amanda, call Baltimore, Maryland home. They're avid travelers, die-hard Orioles fans, and proud parents to two amazing black and white dogs. Hi, Dave. Welcome to the pod.
Hey, Raven. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you on. You are the intro to season 2, which is all about entrepreneurship. And you're also an ally. Season 1 was all women, so I'm super excited to be speaking to a gentleman today. Let's dive right in if you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
All right. So again, we are diving into the topic of entrepreneurship as it relates to the patriarchy. And I want to start off with, in your experience and your professional opinion and everything you've seen out there in corporate and in entrepreneurship, startup, do you feel diversity plays a role in how entrepreneurship goes down, how investing, raising, all the things with it?
Absolutely. And diversity is critical, not just in entrepreneurship, but in business as well. And it's not just about representation. It's really about leveraging the richness of diverse backgrounds and cultures and perspectives, really to drive innovation, growth, success, whether that's in entrepreneurship or business or corporate culture as well.
Yeah. And do you feel it is, actually, this is a timely conversation because something happened with DEI at a university. The universities are striking down programs in Texas. So this is a timely conversation because I feel like within diversity, there has always been this push and pull. And then during the pandemic, I feel like there were a lot of initiatives that really tried to expand diversity, and now we're shrinking it again. In regards to diversity, what steps do you think organizations can take to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, in terms of diversity, whether it's in entrepreneurship, corporate culture, it really starts at the top in a commitment by leadership. Whether it's a Fortune 500 company, whether it's a smaller company, private, nonprofit, et cetera, it's really making sure that the leadership at that organization, brand, or company, they're setting clear goals, clear missions, clear values, and not only holding employees, but themselves accountable, because they're going to lead by example. It also means having diverse hiring practices. And unfortunately, we still have to say that in this day and age, and making sure that hiring practices are inclusive, are equitable, are fair. And that's, of course, essential for building a diverse workforce. It's understanding that no type of person from any particular background or however they identify has a monopoly on ideas or innovation or growth. It's also through continuing training and education at organizations and companies, and understanding that what may have got us here may not get us there, and constantly evaluating and updating what's happening in the context of the world around us within the organization and the people as well, and getting that direct feedback and having that open line of communication. A lot of companies, brands, organizations, laud themselves on, we have an open door policy, but in reality, that practice, it seems to be flawed. There seems to be a disconnect there. And when we're talking about diversity in the workplace or in entrepreneurship, it's it's always going to be a pendulum. And those of us who are allies, who are really pushing for sustainable and lasting diversity and equity in corporate culture and business, we have to remind ourselves that we shouldn't let perfection get in the way of progress. And there are going to be some times maybe when the pendulum swings too far. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's taking the right steps and the right actions and following up on those actions and holding ourselves accountable is great. Sometimes the pendulum may swing too far and maybe it has to come back just a little bit. If the pendulum swings back a little bit, that's not necessarily to be taken as defeat or a massive setback. It's understanding that progress is continuous and it's about working and having open lines of communication at all levels of an organization to understand that there's different perspectives, different values, different missions, and making sure that people, as much as possible, can be on the same page so that there are different ideas being represented at all levels of the company to drive the company forward, but understand how that impacts each person and how they identify themselves is a little bit different. And the more that we can open ourselves up to different ideas and different perspectives, the better our corporate culture, the better we are going to be as corporate citizens as well.
I want to bring this back to entrepreneurship because as you were speaking, I had a thought about the pendulum swinging. And right now, I feel like in entrepreneurship, it was doing a better job of getting closer to even. And then all of a sudden recently, the Fearless Fund was attacked. And do you know the Fearless Fund at all?
I've heard of it. I'm not as intricately familiar with their activities and what their mission is, but I have heard of the group before.
Yeah, so they are a Black women-led fund that funds Black women founders specifically. And so there's a whole thing going on with that. And I feel like we were doing a really good job of getting closer to even, but the truth is we weren't, but we were doing better than we had in the past. And now I feel like the pendulum is already starting to swing that other way. There's a lot of discomfort and I'd say backlash on diversity. And as an ally, when I'm tired, and how do we keep up the fight? How do we choosing one thing and just tackling that? I'm not sure what the hack could be there, but as an ally, how do you keep moving forward, or how would you recommend keeping momentum?
Yeah, that's a great question. And keeping momentum with diversity and entrepreneurship is so important. And just looking at a community like I live in Baltimore, which is 60 to 65% Black. And as an ally, really keeping our eyes and our ears open and being a good listener to what's happening and finding opportunities to be that cheerleader, in some cases a coach to entrepreneurs or peers in the industry who come from more marginalized backgrounds and to really be like, hey, we're here for you, whether it's just taking the time to listen about those concerns and where they see those concerns going. We're talking about the pendulum. If it's kind of swinging back a little bit, it's giving them fuel and energy to not only revive their push, but also collaborate on opportunities to reach new audiences who may not understand or may not be aware of the struggle that's happening. And whether that's pulling in additional people as resources for them to connect with, connecting them to capital, connecting them to different business leaders in the community. It's just making sure that we're always staying open and never closing the door, never closing our eyes, never covering our ears to what's happening, and just being a good listener to our friends in corporate America and also entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Thank you for that point. I want to dive into that a little bit more because you touched on listening, and I will be the first person to admit I struggle with listening. And I think being a better listener makes me a better entrepreneur. It makes me better at so many things. So I try and slow down. I'm really trying to be intentional about listening more, especially these days. It gets hard when things are polarized and heated. Do you have any recommendations on how to, outside of just the whole like slow down and listen, any other ways to be a better listener?
Being a good listener, it kind of starts with having self-awareness. And you touched on this just a little bit, and understanding that, okay, I want to understand your truth, where it is you're coming from. Because I was, to go off on a little bit of a tangent before this conversation, I was just thinking about the scene in the movie Barbie where they were trying to, I believe it was change the law. And it was just like, well, how do you get guys distracted? Ask them for help. When people are asking for help, it doesn't mean that we railroad them with information or what is only our truth. It's really about listening and asking good questions. And that comes from good listening, asking the right questions. And even if the questions initially may not necessarily be the best questions, maybe by being a good listener, you get to those right questions and you see what could potentially be a bigger issue that you can collaborate on, that you can work together to help solve. May not be right away, but you can put action plans in place. You can take measurable and actionable steps to get where you need to go.
Yeah, I agree with asking a lot of questions too, kind of digging in deeper and always almost listening and then asking before diving back into your answer, which gets really hard. It's even hard here on the podcast. I'm like, because as each guest speaks, I'm like, oh, there's so many ways we could take this conversation, but I don't want to interrupt. But then by the time that the conversation has evolved, I'm like, oh, the point is gone. So you went off on a little tangent. Before our call, was reading a conversation happening between an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist, very polarized because it happens to be about an opinion on some male founders who raised in ideation. And this woman happened to say, if this was women, it wouldn't have happened like this. I bring this up because at what point do you redirect a conversation? Do you jump into a conversation? Do you didn't see that? Don't want to look at that? Because I would say that the diversity conversation in all the different places, but especially entrepreneurship and venture capital, where diverse founders are less funded, that's just a fact. When you see those conversations, like, what do you do?
Wow, there's a lot of different ways that a person could react. And it's really just the context of that conversation. And when we look at digital content platforms, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Instagram, the comments on Discord or Reddit, etc., it's finding opportunities to, when necessary, and then also when relevant, if we feel that we have a meaningful contribution there, to steer the conversation in a more holistic direction, whether it's to get back on topic or to stop personal attacks, etc. Sometimes the conversation may have devolved to a certain point where it's just like, oh my gosh, like diving in here is almost a lost cause. And unfortunately, we don't ever want to see ourselves at that point, but it's inserting ourselves into that conversation really does us no good. And it's not to take an immediate defeatist attitude, but if we see that conversation and maybe we have a personal connection to someone where we can have a side conversation, just like, hey, what's going on here? And whether it's a private message, text, even a phone call, strange as that may seem, actually calling somebody and talking to them, just getting that perspective. And it does go back to listening, understanding and asking those questions. How did it get to this point? What's the context there? Because there could be additional context we just may not be privy to. And it's trying to understand individual truths, because your truth is different from my truth and what we've seen, and understanding the perception may not necessarily be reality. But even taking it a step beyond message boards or comment threads, etc., being an ally is stepping up and doing the right thing, even when that time is difficult. And it's not to think that you are any better or worse than anybody involved with that, but if to use the old expression, if you see something, say something. And for too long, people again who look like me were just like, oh, that's whatever, just brush aside, it doesn't impact me, I'm not impacted. But the more allies step up, help people stay accountable to their actions, that hopefully in theory can help break down some of these barriers that have long prevented entrepreneurs from different backgrounds to have access to capital and opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up a bunch of stuff. Phone call. Love that. That did make me giggle. Another thing that you mentioned that I wanted to touch on, and it's going to, again, take us on a short tangent, hopefully. You mentioned Discord and Reddit, and both extremely useful platforms that not everybody is engaging on. Do you spend time there? And if you do you see different conversations happening there around diversity at all than other platforms?
I'm sure that those conversations exist. I think the servers that I, belong to on Discord, and the threads I usually am on Reddit are not necessarily related to entrepreneurship or business. I'm a big sports fan, so a lot of times I'm engaging with my friends on Discord about a certain team, or I'm going to Reddit threads about a particular sport or team. I'm sure on any one of those platforms, diversity and other topics related to that do come up. I'm not a fool to think that they don't. It's just where I'm at, it's less prevalent than I'm sure many other corners of the internet. And whether it's other platforms that have come out, when you look at like Truth Social, or you even look at platforms like, gosh, I'm trying to think of the more conservative equivalent of YouTube. I cannot remember the name, but it's a video hosting platform there. There, people in the last probably 10 to 15 years have really gravitated to their own echo chambers and their own communities. People in digital communities enjoy having their own insights or knowledge kind of being fulfilled, I guess, is the best way I could say that they want to feel right. They want to feel correct. And many times we see them seeking out communities or people who align with their ideas, because maybe it gives them a feeling of safety and security, that they don't feel threatened, that they feel that they can say what they want without reprise from the other side, or they don't have to fight. Some people go and look for that fight on the internet, and we see it plenty of times, whether in more public ways or in sometimes even private ways. And again, being an ally, if when we see those opportunities to insert ourselves thoughtfully and not putting anybody down, but just trying to find those opportunities to steer conversations in a more positive way. It's much tougher in practice than we're saying now, because when you're looking at community management, but also if those conversations are happening on an organization or a brand page, etc., the person responsible for that account or that server, hopefully there's moderation in place to make sure that the discourse is relevant, it's topical, and it takes a tone that is professional, really.
I want to circle back to the patriarchy, of course,
Sure.
because it is hacking the patriarchy. But I also want to dive into a couple points you made, which are all of these platforms and all of, I would say, resources out there that are available to professionals, to entrepreneurs, all of the professional, let's say professional opportunities out there on these platforms. And I don't know if you have this answer. I don't know if this is your area of expertise, but when there are all of these different places to go get information, do you have any recommendations for entrepreneurs on where they should go? Should go feels really loaded. Where they should go, no.
It's, if you're in a professional capacity and you're seeking to further your knowledge or to get information about whether it's, acquiring capital or connecting to people who can, help you in a professional capacity, it's reaching out maybe first to your own kind of trusted network to see if anybody else has any recommendations rather than just putting it out there. Oh, I'm looking for a mentor, or I'm looking to connect with VCs around an idea. There's also probably plenty of professional networking opportunities in communities where people live, whether it's something like networking under 40 or a professional trade group. There are likely professional groups in the community that people can seek out, whether it's through Google search or reaching out to people that they work with or other, mentors, mentees, etc. That can at least be a good start to give more guidance to go forward. So even if you feel overwhelmed on a platform like LinkedIn, it's just like, oh my gosh, I'm just putting myself out there, which a lot of people are hesitant about, and rightfully so. You're putting it out in a public space, but there could be, and there likely are, more private avenues that you could take, at least to start with, that could at least connect you to maybe a person on LinkedIn or whatever digital platform that they may be on, and reaching out and just trying to make those personal connections that, just with traditional networking, it just builds over time. And it's not trying to, oh my gosh, I'm going to be connected to, 20 VCs, and like in speed dating or something. It's just taking the time to thoughtfully craft that network and, hopefully over time be connected to great people who foster great ideas, foster a culture of entrepreneurship, and understand that no type of person has a monopoly on ideas.
I love this. I want to reiterate that just a little, because again, we are talking about hacks and networking within your network. Warming up the people that you have is a great first stop. Second to that is that layer of don't be afraid to ask for help either on LinkedIn. That when I was going into my first startup, which floundered, by the way, so that everyone has that truth too, things are going to flounder. I found my first couple of mentors by asking on LinkedIn. I literally did the research. These are great people to be my mentors. And I just cold reached out. Don't know if that works a ton anymore, but I did ask for that mentorship. And so that's a great hack, like starting with your network, warming up your own network and starting there and building on that. Bringing it back to hacks and the patriarchy, since this is hacking the patriarchy. Obviously, in season 1, we defined the patriarchy. I don't know if we defined it enough. I've heard more conversation about the patriarchy in the past 6 months since, I don't even know if it's been 6 months. Anyway, since the first season, I've learned a lot more about the patriarchy and the history of the patriarchy. It changes your perspective a little. But again, hacking the patriarchy, coming back to entrepreneurship and possible hacks entrepreneurs might use to get ahead if they are a diverse founder, diverse entrepreneur. So bringing back those hacks, do you have any hacks off the top of your head?
I don't have any hacks off the top of my head. It's from my experience around, entrepreneurship. It's been more of a slow build instead of just a quick hack to get where you need to go. I don't want to discourage people. It doesn't have to be a long process, and it probably doesn't need to be. Again, it comes back so much to listening. If you hear somebody with a great idea, being open to that idea, fostering that person's idea, maybe giving them a great direction or who is better suited to really provide opportunities for them and guide them in a more strategic direction. When you look at ideas from entrepreneurs, not every idea is going to take off. And sometimes the best ideas start off as absolutely terrible ones, and that's okay. It's, again, listening to somebody's idea. I love the thought and where that's going. In what ways can we look at honing that a little bit? Maybe it's too broad. Maybe the idea needs to be narrowed in scope a little bit. But getting back to what you were asking about hacks, I don't know if I have like this silver bullet hack for somebody to really, I don't want to say jump the line, because that's not necessarily the right way to think about it, but to be connected to somebody who can better foster their idea or better support their idea moving forward to get it to fruition.
You said you didn't have any hacks, but you truly threw out some truths and some knowledge there. And I tell people all the time, it's not probably what they want to hear, but entrepreneurship isn't easy. Entrepreneurship is it's not a 20-hour work week. It's probably not even a 40, probably closer to 80. And you're going to fail, probably multiple times. And what comes out of it probably won't look like what you had envisioned in the beginning. So you threw out some serious truths there. And I so appreciate that. I don't think we have enough conversations about that. I see all the time people posting how so much we focus on the end, like we focus on a successful entrepreneur, a successful exit, like the success, but we don't know that it took them 10 years to get there. And that, like Pinterest, the original product was nothing like what we experienced in the end. So I really, really appreciate the truth. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we both see it on digital platforms, whether it's LinkedIn or Reddit or Discord, just memes about people talking about success and what people think it is. It's never going to be that straight line growth. It's going to look like a crazy straw. It's going to have bends and twists. It's going to go backwards. It's going to go down. It's going to go up. It's going to go off the page. It's going to come back on the page somehow. And eventually staying with it, understanding that failure is going to come, but learning from that as well.
Yeah. Yes. We are going to, through this season 2, we are going to dive into all of these topics too, the scale, the pivot, the exit, all the things that come with it, which is, again, usually a very long journey. It's very rarely, actually, I'm going to be honest, I don't know of anyone that just launched the thing, did the thing, and was like, in year 1, I'm profitable and all these amazing things. Usually
that actually happens.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Let's dive into your background a little bit and your experience in entrepreneurship, because your background is it social media marketing?
Yes, most of my background started in journalism, broadcast journalism. Ooh. Evolved into digital media, social media, communications baked in, and that's kind of been more of my track, more communications, public relations, media relations, social media, digital content marketing over the past decade, whether that's been for Fortune 500 media companies, for private companies that then went public, now doing more freelance consulting for clients, more in the government and nonprofit space. So yes, again, we're talking about success and journeys, and it has twists and turns. Career arcs also have that kind of meandering maze-like quality, crazy straw, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah. And do you have any hacks for that?
Just like you were talking about with entrepreneurship isn't easy. Understanding that when you're starting your career, When I started my career, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to get into broadcast news. I went to school for it. Before I even went to college for it, I was doing it in high school. I loved broadcast news, and I still enjoy broadcast news. After spending a decade or so in it, I realized how people got content, how people were connecting to one another had changed beyond just what we had traditionally thought of linear based television and getting appointment based television, if you look at it that way, when it comes to news, and understanding the power of instant news, and whether you're looking at news on social media platforms, news obviously through apps or through just content websites, whether it's behind a paywall or it's more traditional free local news content. It's connecting people with content where they are on their screen, on their time, and not, hey, this is what we think you should know. It's about, here's what's going on, and whether it's to entertain you, to educate you, to inspire you, or just to take your mind off something.
I want to start wrapping up this conversation, but I do want to touch on that a little bit because I feel like journalism, news, media, I feel like it has had this very interesting evolution, but I feel like there's still so much room for innovation. And I kind of wonder where you see that. I think of where the two roads cross. We're having a conversation about entrepreneurship. We just touched on your background in journalism, but the truth is content is everywhere, and it's everywhere from all these different people. It's no longer just the select few. Again, the paywall, the local news. It's everywhere, and it's from everyone. So is innovation going to expand on that, or is innovation going to shrink back as systems do sometimes? Like, where do you imagine that innovation?
When it comes to innovation, media, news, and content, innovation has to come. It's slowly dying in its current form. And what I've seen in the industry is just this long-standing stance of, well, this is the way we make money. Whether you look at broadcasting and you look at carriage fees and what companies pay to broadcast content and the revenue that they get in from each person who has a cable subscription. For so long, that's been the gravy train that supported just looking at broadcast journalism. And we saw this maybe 5-10 years ago as traditional legacy broadcast media companies were seeing the impact of digital media in the broadcast space. They just rushed. It's just like, oh my gosh, we're going to create this great website and it's going to have this social content and we're going to get all this money from advertising and from clicks and from views. And that's not necessarily the case. We've seen it plenty within the past 2 to 3 years with companies, whether it's Vice or BuzzFeed or other very large national digital media properties, and even broadcast companies scaling back, going bankrupt, selling off, valuations incredibly decreasing. And it's also, they just tried to implement this legacy broadcast model into a digital model. It's a little bit on the public to understand that journalism isn't free. It costs, quality journalism is very expensive. It costs a lot to tell the stories that nobody's willing to tell. And when you're looking at the broadcast media space on a larger scope, the consolidation of ownership companies, particularly at the local level, you look at companies like Sinclair, who I used to work for, Nexstar, Tegna, the CBS, ABC, Fox, NBC O&Os, which means owned and operated. All of these companies are shrinking who owns the local media space. And that's, when you're talking about diversity, that shrinks diversity of ideas. It has one central idea that's being forced onto people. And that's where innovation should really come from. There needs to be a greater emphasis on diversity in the journalism space, not just by who's telling the story, who's on screen, but the perspectives and who we're talking to get information and to find out truths and to really inform and educate the audience. So in theory, we have a more informed electorate. That's the goal, and to tell those stories so we have a more informed and educated society. In practice, that's not what's really happening because we see the impacts of capitalism into journalism. It needs to turn a profit. You look at those companies, they're publicly traded companies. They're beholden to their shareholders. They're not beholden to their audience. And I think that's a systemic flaw. And unfortunately, I don't see some knight in shining armor coming through and saving a lot of media companies. You even look at an example like Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, and an organization like the Post not being able to turn the kind of profit that a company like Amazon. Again, it's understanding that journalism and quality journalism is very expensive. And unless the general public has a real understanding to the point where they support local journalism, they're willing to pay that monthly subscription. I see a real struggle and innovation there because the people who are running these media organizations, they want to turn a profit, but people think that they should just be getting news for free. And however that's going to happen, where we can finally marry the understanding of the public that quality journalism costs money and they're willing to pay for it, and the people that own media companies start to see that profit, or at least a break-even point.
Oh, we could talk about journalism all day. I do want to circle back to some of the hacks you did throughout, which was listening. So imperative to entrepreneurship, but to everything else out there. You didn't mention it, but with your conversation around journalism, another thing is seeking out multiple opinions. You didn't directly say it. Wherever you're consuming your news, wherever you're consuming your content, whatever that is, seeing something, not just taking it at face value, doing your research, that bleeds into entrepreneurship too. So whatever you hear, whatever you see, double checking. So listening, checking your facts, getting second opinions, warming up your network, keeping your network, diving into your network first. Is there anything else that you want to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, well, we already touched on it a little bit, but it goes into listening and just asking those right questions and understanding that if you don't ask the right question initially, soon enough, you'll get to the questions that need to be asked and finding out that information and be curious. And be curious to what's happening around you and understand that obviously the world that we're living in, I think we all know that it evolves, it changes, it devolves, and being adaptable can be a bit of a hack. And it's maybe being somewhat of a chameleon and being a sponge and soaking up what's around you, because when you're soaking up knowledge, perspectives, from people who don't look like you, come from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic status, that can only help a more diverse and better discourse and dialogue amongst groups, whether it's entrepreneurs, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's among friend groups. Just having those different perspectives just help us to be better people to each other. And especially in a time like this when we appear so angry and so polarized, it's just take a beat, listen. What is it that the other person is saying? And maybe they don't necessarily want help at that particular time. They might just need to vent, but be that ally, be that sounding board, be a person that someone can count on, and to be an honest broker of advice.
Well, Dave, it has been my absolute pleasure to have you on the show. If anyone that's listening in wants to reach out and connect with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, Raven, it was a pleasure speaking with you. I was very honored to be part of this season's podcast. If you want to connect with me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I am very fortunate that I'm very easy to find just with my last name. So I don't think that there's another Dave Trausneck in the United States, if the world for that matter. So you can just look me up on LinkedIn. You can certainly connect with me on Instagram as well. Usually it's just, pictures of myself, our dogs, my wife and I, but happy to connect with anybody at any time.
Awesome. And it's Dave Trausneck, Did I say it right? Dave Trausneck, Trausneck. I will put all of your links in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Raven. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. For all the juicy deets on this episode, be sure to check out our show notes or give us a holler on Instagram at Hacking the Patriarchy Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support this podcast, don't be shy. Please share it with your friends. Sharing is caring after all. Lastly, if you'd like to lend your personal support, please take a moment to tell the world about it with a review on your favorite streaming platform. We'd be forever grateful. Tune in again soon to enjoy a brand new episode of the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. And until next time, keep on hacking, my friends. If you've made it this far, I have one more little thing to share with you. Did you know that this isn't my only feminist endeavor? That's right, there's more. I run a media startup dedicated to providing the most current and pertinent news about women, for women, and by women. Our mission centers on delivering a platform where the latest updates regarding women-led initiatives are extensively covered, highlighting women's actions, accomplishments, perspectives, and other elements that profoundly influence women's lives and contribute to meaningful progress. I invite you to head over to femled.news to learn more.